It's Tara from Tara Lee Quiltery. So if you're watching this video, it's because you've purchased either Mother, which is my block of the month pattern, or Helpers. Both patterns utilize this awesome teardrop shape, and this video is to teach you how to get that teardrop super accurate and beautiful and gorgeous using the templates that are within the pattern. So let's do it. All right, so to this point, I have pieced my center. I have also used my template to cut out my center, and I've used my other templates to cut out my two background pieces here. Before I remove the templates, I remembered to mark my registration marks. These are super handy when you are matching up this piece to the center, and the same with the other. So you'll see, you can probably barely see in the video here, but I've made these tiny little tick marks where the templates told me to, both on the centerpiece and on my outside pieces. So this makes it super easy when you are matching up your fabric. So with this one, I'm going to carefully flip it over. I'm going to match up my two registration marks there, make sure the edges are matched up, and then pin it in place. I'm going to do that with my other registration marks. Oh, and I should mention you're going to do one at a time, so we're going to set that aside. I'm going to do that with my other registration marks, and then I'll tell you what to do next. Okay, so I should mention that I'm pinning from the outside going in. I usually go down, back up, and down again. Yeah, okay, so I've done all four registration marks here. Now I can just gently lay the rest of this, matching up the edges, and that should be nice and flush because it's flat. This is the flat part, and then it starts to curve, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky. So you're going to see that this top fabric is going to have to stretch to match your bottom fabric. And so if you ease it with your fingers like this, you'll see that it'll naturally want to match up with the edge of your curve there. And so you're going to want to pin that in place. You can do one pin, or if you are love pinning, or if you're unsure about curves, you could do two pins in between each of the registration marks. So again, like that, you see how it just gently matches up with the edge of the curve there, and the last one here. So I'm going to put those pins in now. Last thing I want to say before I go over to my machine is that you will notice that these do not match up right there. I've got a little bit of purple hanging over, and the white's not quite long enough. That is okay. That's how they're supposed to be. Trust me. All right, I'm here at my machine and I'm ready to go. So with this side, I'm going to start at the top here. One thing I did want to say is that everyone has a preferred way they like to piece curves. For me, I like using this foot because it's clear, I can see through it. And I like moving my needle over to the left and then lining up the edge of my fabric with my little tiny slit here that's in my foot. I've measured it so that it's perfectly a 1/4 inch from my needle to this slit, and I like how this works for piecing curves, and you'll have your own way. Anyway, so I'm going to start at the top here. You'll notice that when you start at the top, you're pretty much going to start right at the point right there, pretty close to it, and then you're going to keep going. So let's sew for a bit. All right, now we're getting to the curved part. I like to sew pretty close to my pin here. My needle's down. I'm going to take out my pin. I'm going to hold everything with my fingers. This is going to be wavy, and that's okay. As long as where you are sewing is nice and flat, then you should not have any tucks. So I'm gonna get close to my next one here. Needle down, take out my pin. I like to hold it all with my fingers nice and flush with the edge there. Next pin. I'm going pretty fast because I'm I've done a lot of these, so I'm a little bit more confident than maybe you are, but go slow, take your time. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. Now, the reason why I just didn't fast forward is because at the end here, what I want you to do is to go in to less than 1/4 of an inch at the very end. For like the last 8 or so stitches, go in less than 1/4 of an inch. And I'll show you why in a minute. But here we go. We're going to go less than 1/4 of an inch. There we go. Okay. Now we've got this beautiful curve. There's no tucks or anything like that. I'm ready to go over and open and iron it or press it open. I'm keeping my seam allowance towards the outside of my curve like that. I'm going to use my iron, make that nice and crisp, and then I'm going to pin the other side. Okay, I've pinned the other side on. 2 things of note. Again, this will not extend as far as you think you need it to, but it is far enough, I promise, I swear. Okay, and over here, when I went to match up this registration mark, oh no, it's being covered by this one. So you just kind of have to guess. The registration mark is 1/4 inch in from the edge of this. So I went in about 1/2 an inch. I put my pin about halfway through there, so 1/4 inch in, 1/4 inch in, and that's about where my registration mark would be. Okay, let's sew. Alright, so on this side, I'm actually starting at the bottom of the curve here. So again, just to remember, I'm going to start at a little less than 1/4 of an inch for the first few stitches, and then I'll go into 1/4 of an inch all the way around. Alright, so I'm at the end of my block here. If I keep following 1/4 inch, watch what happens to this point here. I am right at it. Ta-da! It's magic. Now, if I open this up like this, then you'll see, look, they match up nice and perfect, nice and flush. It's magic! Okay, my block is all nice and pressed. Now it's time to trim it up. So you probably won't be able to notice very well in the video here, but I did press a crease here in the halfway mark back when I was, after I had pieced this center. I made a center mark here, and this will be nice to use when you are trimming your block. So first thing I'm going to do is trim this so that the bottom edge of my curve, I'm going to trim 1/4 inch away. Now, the reason why we did a little less than 1/4 of an inch down here, you can probably barely see it in the video here, but if you follow the natural curve here, you want that little tiny area to kind of dip down below that natural curve, because if you trim 1/4 inch away from the natural curve, not from this little wonky spot, but from the natural curve, when you sew your border piece on at 1/4 inch, your border piece will cover up all of this raw edge here, including where they meet right there. So as long as you are just a stitch or two down from the 1/4 inch, then when you sew your seam right here, your border piece will cover all of that raw stuff. All right, so let's trim. Alright, so I wanted to give you an even better view here. I'm getting ready to trim. I've made sure that my ruler is nice and square with the center of my block. You can also judge by these seams here, which should be nice and square, to make sure your ruler is also square with your block. Okay, so I'm about to trim. I'm about 1/4 inch away, but you can see right there where all those raw edges are, I'm going to trim just slightly less than 1/4 of an inch from that area. That way when I sew my 1/4 inch right there, all of that stuff under there will be in the seam allowance. Okay, I did it. I made the cut. So now I'm ready to cut the top. So this block is going to be 16.5 inches. So you'll see that I'm about at 16 3/4, which is great. So when I trim at 16.5, the area right here will be slightly more than 1/4 of an inch, and I'll show you why. All right, I've trimmed, and the space from the tip of your teardrop to the edge is going to measure more than 1/4 of an inch, just slightly more. And this is done on purpose. That way, when you attach your border piece and you sew at 1/4 of an inch, you'll go probably about right there, and you will not cut into your nice crisp point there. That'll stay nice and crisp. So that's done on purpose. Okay, last thing to do is to trim the sides of your block. It should measure 10.5 inches wide. Right now it's probably at about 11 inches wide. So I'm going to use my center mark that you probably can't see. And then I'm going to make sure it's nice and square with the top and bottom lines. And I'm going to measure 5 1/4 inches from each half, right? And slice. And what it will do is it will make this area right here about 1/4 of an inch wide. That way when you attach your border piece, it'll fit nice and snug against that curve there, but not cut into it. So it'll be about 1/4 inch away is where you're going to trim. All right, I've trimmed. You can see that right here, these measure approximately 1/4 of an inch. I'm ready to attach my border pieces, and I'll show you what it looks like. Ooh, I magically changed the color of the block too. No, I'm just kidding. This is another block, but I just wanted to show you so you can see that the border pieces did not go into the teardrop at all. They're just about right there where they should be. Same with the other side right here. And then that bottom, because I dipped down a little bit, I was able to catch all that raw stuff within my seam allowance, and it's nice and clean up there. And up here, because that area was slightly more than 1/4 of an inch, when I sewed my border piece on, it did not cut off my tip there. It's nice and crisp. All right guys, I hope those tips help. Enjoy!